We were 6 when we entered the forest. Just 6 friends trying to recreate that last perfect summer before adult life hit us like a truck. Rachel, Kyle, Jeremy, Jess, Dylan, and me. All of us had grown up in the same small town in Oregon, surrounded by trees and endless fog. We picked a spot up near Granger Pass. Deep woods, no cell signal, no tourists. It was supposed to be remote. Peaceful. But something felt wrong the moment we parked the trucks and started hauling gear down the trail. The forest was too quiet. No birds, no bugs. Just this stillness that clung to your skin. We reached the clearing by late afternoon, a wide open patch of dead grass and black soil like something had once scorched it. Jeremy joked that it looked like a crop circle for hobos, and we all laughed. We set up our tents, gathered firewood, and by sundown, the bonfire was roaring. It was one of those perfect nights, the air crisp, the sky clear, stars spread like powdered sugar. Kyle pulled out a flask, Dylan got the Bluetooth speaker going, and Rachel danced barefoot around the flames. For a moment, it felt like old times, like we had outrun everything waiting back home. But it didn't last. Around midnight, we started hearing it. At first, we thought it was the wind, long, low howls threading through the trees. Then we realized the air was dead still. No wind, no movement, just that sound. It wasn't an animal howl. It was lower, like a moan, dragged through the dirt. Jess killed the music. We all stood still, half drunk and listening. Then, from the darkness, we heard the snap of a branch. Something big, too big to be a raccoon or deer. And it wasn't just one sound, it was multiple, snaps from different directions. We tried to laugh it off, said it was probably elk, maybe even bears, but nobody really believed it. Not when we saw the first set of eyes. Just outside the firelight, maybe 15 feet into the woods, a pair of amber eyes blinked at us, not glowing like in horror movies, real animal eyes, catching just enough of the flame to glint. Then a second pair, then 3 more. We counted 7, all low to the ground, all unmoving. Dylan reached for his flashlight, but Rachel stopped him. "Don't shine it," she whispered. "Don't let them know we see them." No one questioned why she said that. We just obeyed. For the next 30 minutes, none of us moved. We stayed close to the fire, speaking in low voices, trying to convince ourselves we were safe. Then the smell hit. Like rotting meat mixed with wet fur and something chemical, like burning rubber. It made Jess gag. Kyle stepped toward the tree line, holding a branch with a flame on the end. "Back off!" he shouted. "Get the hell out of here!" The eyes didn't flinch, but one of them, slowly started moving sideways, not running, just pacing, like it was testing us. That's when we heard it, from behind the tents. A sharp tearing sound, followed by a high-pitched shriek. Animal, but not quite. Rachel bolted to check. She screamed. I ran after her, and what I saw is burned into my mind. Our tent, torn wide open. Inside, our cooler was shredded, food strewn everywhere. But what chilled me was the prints, clawed, but not symmetrical. Deep, wide, too many toes, and they led straight into the woods. As we stared, something moved in the shadows. We turned and ran back to the fire without saying a word. The rest of the night we took turns keeping watch. No one slept. Every so often we'd hear movement in the underbrush. One time, we heard what sounded like heavy breathing, close. Jeremy swore he saw a shape watching from the rocks. But by dawn, nothing had happened. The eyes were gone. The sound stopped. And we were just 6 friends sitting around the ashes of a dying fire, pretending everything was fine. We decided to leave that morning, pack it up, hike back, maybe find a ranger and report what we saw. But when we tried to find the trailhead, it was gone. I'm not saying we got lost, we had maps, GPS, we knew the area, but the path we came in on, it just wasn't there. Trees where the trail used to be. Even the markers we carved on the bark the day before had vanished. That's when Rachel said it. I don't think they want us to leave. We didn't panic at first. People get turned around in the woods all the time. But this wasn't that. We hadn't walked more than 30 steps before we realized the forest around us wasn't matching the topo maps, or even our memory. That slope with the red pine? Gone. The flat path down to the creek? Replaced by dense underbrush and unfamiliar trees. Kyle tried to blame the fog. It had rolled in low, thick like smoke, hugging the forest floor. But fog doesn't move landmarks. Fog doesn't erase tree carvings or cairns. Something wasn't right, and the silence was too heavy to be natural. No birds, no squirrels. Even the flies were gone. We decided to split into two groups. Jeremy and Dylan would take the old compass and try to find the road we drove in on, while the rest of us stayed behind to watch camp. They promised to be back in an hour. They took water, a flare, and one of the camp hatchets. And then they vanished into the mist. We kept busy while waiting, breaking down the tents, organizing supplies, trying to keep our heads clear. Rachel kept looking back into the trees every few minutes. Jess noticed too. "They're not coming back, are they?" she said quiet. Rachel didn't answer. That's when I started to get scared. Not just creeped out, truly scared. Hours passed. No sign of Jeremy or Dylan. The forest got darker even though it was still afternoon. That fog, God, that fog. It clung to your skin, made everything wet and muffled. We fired a flare straight into the air. No reply, no sound. Just the flare hissing in the mist, the smoke curling downward instead of up. Rachel paced the camp, muttering to herself about the ridge line. She swore there was a ranger station if we just went east. "It's not that far," she said. "I used to hike here when I was 12. I know this place." But when we tried heading east, we hit a drop-off, a ravine so deep we couldn't see the bottom. None of us remembered it being there. By late afternoon, the hunger kicked in. Not just the usual snacking kind. The sharp, burning emptiness you feel when your body knows it's in danger. We opened what food we had left. Jerky, trail mix, some canned soup. But something had gotten into the cans. They were punctured, lids swollen, smelling of sour metal. The jerky was sticky, mold on the trail mix. All of it, ruined. It hadn't been like that yesterday. The only food left untouched was a sealed pack of protein bars in Jess's bag. She didn't want to share, said it was for emergencies only. We didn't fight her, yet. That night, we didn't light a fire. Not because we didn't want to, but because the wood wouldn't burn. I'm serious. We stacked it, dried it with towels, even used rubbing alcohol from the first aid kit. It smoldered, hissed, but never caught. Rachel said the wood was wrong, too green maybe, but I held a piece in my hand. It cracked like dry bone. And it was warm, not from the sun, just naturally warm, like it was already burning from the inside out. Jess started crying then, silent and slow, tears streaking her cheeks in the pale dusk. "It's not wood," she whispered. "It's not real." Around midnight, we heard someone calling from the trees, a voice, male, hoarse, saying, "Help," over and over. At first we thought it was Jeremy, but the voice never got closer, just repeated the same cadence, the same breaks. "Help! Help! Help!" Rachel covered her ears. "That's not a person," she said. "That's a call lure. That's something trying to bring us in." We didn't move. We stayed in our circle, blades out, waiting for dawn. At some point, Kyle wandered out to pee. We begged him to stay close. He grumbled and walked 5 paces into the brush. We heard the sound of urine hitting leaves, then a grunt, and then nothing. No scream, no footsteps, no reply. Jess called for him softly, then louder. I ran to where he was and found nothing. No Kyle. Just his flashlight lying on the moss. Still on, still warm, like he had dropped it seconds before. I yelled until my throat bled. Nothing answered. The 3 of us huddled together until sunrise. Still no trail, still no Jeremy, no Dylan, no Kyle. No sound, but our own breathing. Then we noticed something worse. The fog had left a trail. a thin layer of dew on the ground, like it had flowed around our camp and left streaks, like something had dragged itself around us in a spiral, around and around and around. Jess threw up. Rachel stared at it like it was a symbol. Me? I just looked up. There were no birds, but the trees were full of nests. Dozens, all empty. By sunrise, it was just me, Rachel, and Jess. 3 people, 6 backpacks, and no exit. We had enough water for maybe a day if we rationed it, and no more protein bars. Jess had eaten the last one in the early hours without telling us. Her lips were cracked. Rachel's knuckles were bleeding from where she'd clawed at the bark of a tree, looking for direction or signs or anything. Me? I was just trying to keep my brain quiet, because thinking too much meant picturing Kyle's flashlight again and wondering what had taken him, or how fast it could move without making a sound. We decided to climb. Rachel remembered a fire tower from a hike she did 10 years ago. On a ridge east of the creek, she said. We didn't have a creek, but we had a slope, a steep incline of shale and broken logs that looked like it could lead up. So we climbed. Every few minutes we'd stop and listen, always the same, silence so thick it made your ears ring. But halfway up, Jess slipped. Her boot caught on a root and she went down hard, slicing her shin open on a rock. The cut was bad, long, deep. She screamed, and for the first time I realized how loud noise felt wrong out there. Like it attracted attention. We stopped the bleeding best we could. Bandages, duct tape, even one of my socks. But Jess couldn't walk on it, and Rachel didn't want to leave her behind. We argued, loud, and the forest noticed. I swear to God, Matt, the moment Rachel raised her voice, the woods responded. A tree, not a branch, not a twig. A whole goddamn tree shifted nearby, just slightly. Enough to creak, enough to let you know it could move if it wanted to. We all heard it, and we all shut up. We left Jess. There's no pretty way to put that. She told us to. Said she didn't want to slow us down. Rachel gave her a flare. The last one. I left my knife, and then we climbed. Higher. Faster. We didn't talk. We didn't cry. We just climbed. For over an hour, until the slope turned to loose gravel and the trees thinned. And then, somehow, we found it. A tower. Rusted, abandoned, but real. About 40 feet tall. A metal skeleton with a rickety ladder and an open cabin at the top. A ranger lookout from decades ago. Maybe the one Rachel remembered, maybe not. We climbed it. Rachel went first, fast and reckless. I followed, every step groaning under my weight. At the top, we found an old radio, busted, a map, faded, and bones. Animal, I think. A raccoon or possum or something that had curled up in the corner to die. But from the top of that tower, we could see the canopy stretch for miles. And in the distance, barely visible through the mist, we saw a road. Not far, maybe 3 miles. We had a direction. Finally. But before we could move, Rachel spotted something. Down at the base of the tower near the tree line. A shape, not an animal, not a man. Something low, pale and wide. Crawling. Not fast, but steady. Moving like it knew we saw it. Rachel pulled out the flare Jess had given her and fired it straight down. It hissed, lit the woods in red. And we saw it. Not a creature, not a ghost. A man. Naked, dirty, skin like wax, eyes blank, limbs twisted like he'd broken every bone and kept crawling anyway. And behind him, 4 more. Same shape, same crawl. Human, but not. Worn down by the forest, or maybe part of it. Rachel didn't wait. She climbed down fast, shouting for me to follow. I hesitated, just long enough to watch one of them stop crawling and look up, right at me. Then it moved. Not crawling now. Standing. Running. We ran harder than I've ever run in my life. Through brambles, through fog, through cuts and thorns and mud. 1 mile. 2. Every step felt like it was being watched. We didn't hear pursuit, but we didn't dare stop. When we broke through the trees onto a narrow Forest Service road, It felt like crossing into another world. There was no car, no ranger station, just gravel and sunlight, and a silence that felt normal again. We followed that road until we reached a campground, abandoned, but with a signal. Rachel called 911. I don't remember what we said. Search teams went in that night. They found nothing. No tower, no tents, no Jess, no Jeremy, no Dylan, not even Kyle's flashlight. They told us we were lucky to survive, told us it was dehydration, panic, hallucinations, but we know better. The forest doesn't want to kill you. It wants to break you, to reshape you, and if you're not strong enough, it keeps you, forever. The summer sun blazed down on the small coastal town, making the sand too hot to walk on. At the edge of the cliff stood the old beach house, a run-down wooden place battered by years of storms. Locals rarely mentioned it, but those who did shared creepy stories about Eleanor, the woman who vanished during a summer storm ages ago. Since then, the house has been abandoned, a ghostly reminder of lost tales. One sweltering evening, I felt pulled toward the house, even though the air was thick and still. The broken windows rattled softly, and an eerie chill surrounded the place. As I opened the creaky front door, a mix of salt, smoke, and decay hit me. Definitely not a welcoming smell. Shadows crept along the walls as I moved deeper into the house, my footsteps echoing in the dusty, empty rooms. At the far end of the living room, I spotted a pale figure by the fireplace. My heart raced, and when I blinked, it vanished like a mirage. Whispers filled the air, wrapping around me like a thick fog. Suddenly, the front door slammed shut, and the temperature dropped. My flashlight flickered out, plunging me into darkness. I froze, listening to the house creak, which morphed into soft sobbing. The place haunted me, pulling me back despite my fear. Stories of disappearances near the cliffs spread, and the townsfolk whispered about Eleanor's restless spirit, said to appear when the summer sun blazed. I went back to the house one night, determined to find out what was going on. As midnight approached, the air turned icy, cutting through the summer heat. Whispers grew into heavy words that pressed on my chest. Then, out of nowhere, a woman appeared by the fireplace, her eyes hollow, filled with sorrow and rage. She silently reenacted her last moments, and I felt like I was drowning in thick salt water. It hit me that the house wasn't just haunted. It was alive with pain. When dawn broke, she vanished, the warmth returned, and I stumbled out, soaked in sweat and fear. The old beach house stood silent again, its secrets buried deep. The next day, I chatted with an old fisherman who knew the town's history like the back of his hand. He shared the tale of Eleanor, who tried to save a kid caught in a storm but got dragged under by the waves. Since then, folks say her spirit haunts the place, especially when summer hits. He warned me to steer clear of the cliffs during peak sun. That night, I could hear faint cries on the wind, mixing with Eleanor's sad wails. The beach house felt heavy with unspoken grief, and I couldn't shake the urge to go back. Each visit uncovered more shadows and secrets that the summer night seemed to want to keep hidden. The locals were worried, but the mystery was too tempting to resist. One evening, I took my camera to catch some ghostly action by the cliffs. As the sun dipped, I set up near the house, feeling the heat but sensing a chill in the air. Suddenly, my camera flickered, showing strange static. Through the lens, I spotted ghostly figures gliding along the shore. Then, I heard whispers, clear enough to catch Eleanor's name repeated like a chant. A cold hand brushed my shoulder, but when I turned, there was nobody. Freaked out, I bolted from the house, feeling the temperature rise as if the sun itself was telling me to scram. Reviewing the footage later, I saw twisted faces and shadows that made my skin crawl. This house was more than a memory. It was a portal to past tragedies. The nights grew worse after that. I started hearing footsteps outside my window, slow and deliberate, despite the stillness of the summer night. Lights flickered unpredictably, and strange, cold drafts swept through my home. Friends noticed my growing paranoia, but dismissed my warnings as the effects of heat and stress. Yet, I knew something followed me from the beach house, something tied to Eleanor's endless suffering. One particularly hot night, I awoke to find muddy footprints on my porch, leading directly to the cliffs. Fear rooted me in place as I realized the summer heat had brought more than just sweat and sunburns. It had awakened a restless spirit unwilling to rest. The next day, I found a weathered photograph buried in the sand near the cliffs, depicting Eleanor and the child she tried to save. Her eyes seemed to follow me, pleading for release. The town's summer facade was cracked, revealing a dark past that refused to stay buried. Determined to end the haunting, I returned to the beach house for a final confrontation. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the house seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. Eleanor's spirit appeared once again, her form flickering between sorrow and rage. I spoke to her softly, promising to help her find peace. She pointed toward the cliffs, where a jagged rock jutted into the sea, a place where the child had drowned. Together, we walked to the edge, the summer air heavy with salt and sorrow. I placed the weathered photograph on the rock, whispering a prayer for release. The temperature lifted, warmth returning with the setting sun. Eleanor's form slowly faded, her face finally peaceful. As the first stars appeared, the beach house stood quiet, its grip loosened but not entirely gone. The summer heat had triggered a tragedy, but now it also marked a beginning of rest, for Eleanor and for the town. The days after that night felt so surreal, like the town was holding its breath. The summer heat lingered, but the chill around the beach house had lifted, at least for now. Locals said Eleanor's spirit had found peace, but I wasn't convinced. The cliffs felt like a wound barely scabbed over. I decided to explore the coastline, hoping to find clues about the house and its tragic past. Walking along the rocky shore, the air was thick with seaweed and salt, while seagulls cried out in the distance. The waves crashed against the rocks, relentless as the heat. Then, I noticed strange markings carved into the cliffs, ancient symbols I couldn't figure out. As I went deeper, a faint, mournful melody floated on the wind, making my skin prickle. The coastline felt alive, like something was watching me. That night, sleep came fitfully, haunted by dreams of drowning and desperate whispers. I awoke to a cold sweat, the memory of those carved symbols vivid in my mind. Determined to understand, I sought out the town's historian, an elderly woman who had lived there all her life. In her cluttered study filled with yellowed books and dusty artifacts, she told me stories passed down through generations, tales of the sea's fury and the souls it claimed. She explained that the cliffs had long been considered cursed, a place where restless spirits lingered, especially in the blazing summer months. According to legend, Eleanor's disappearance was not unique. Many others had vanished near those rocks, swallowed by the tide or claimed by forces beyond understanding. The summer heat was said to awaken the boundary between the living and the dead, thinning the veil that separated worlds. Her voice dropped to a whisper as she warned me to be careful, for the house and the cliffs were tied to an ancient sorrow that did not easily release its grip. The stories painted a picture of a relentless cycle, summer's heat triggering grief, and grief feeding the restless spirits. Back at the beach house, the atmosphere shifted again as the days grew longer and hotter. One evening, as the sun dipped toward the horizon, I noticed the air thickening, as if the heat itself was growing heavy and oppressive. Inside the house, shadows lengthened unnaturally, moving just out of sight. I heard faint tapping sounds coming from the walls, slow and rhythmic, like a warning heartbeat. Exploring the second floor, I found a dusty old diary tucked beneath a loose floorboard. Its pages were brittle, filled with Eleanor's shaky handwriting. The entries detailed her growing fear during the summer storm and her desperate attempts to protect the child trapped in the rising waters. Her final words spoke of a strange presence watching from the cliffs, an unseen force that had sealed their fate. Reading her words, I felt a deep sadness wash over me, accompanied by a creeping dread. The diary ended abruptly, as if torn out in haste. That night, the whispers returned louder than ever, and the cold returned with a vengeance. Unable to resist the pull, I spent the next few nights camped inside the house. The temperature dropped sharply at midnight, frost appearing on the windows despite the summer heat outside. Eleanor's spirit returned, this time more solid and angry. She paced the rooms, her eyes flashing with fury, repeating phrases I couldn't understand. The house groaned and creaked, as if alive and struggling against an unseen force. Suddenly, a violent gust slammed open the front door, sending sand and debris swirling inside. Outside, I heard the crashing of waves growing louder, more violent than usual for a calm summer night. I stepped outside to see the ocean churning wildly against the cliffs, black clouds gathering on the horizon. The storm Eleanor had feared was returning. I felt a deep chill despite the heat, a warning that this time, the past and present were about to collide. The restless spirit was not ready to rest, and whatever had taken Eleanor was stirring again. The town was getting ready for the storm, boarding up windows and tying down boats. Summer tourists had already left, sensing something was off. I tried to warn some locals, but they just shrugged it off as old tales. Only the oldest folks whispered about summer storms and lost souls. When the storm hit, lightning flashed, lighting up the cliffs like a nightmare. I stood on the beach house porch, watching the waves crash against the rocks. The house shook with every gust, and the whispers turned to screams. Then, I saw her, a figure on the cliff, maybe Eleanor. She raised her arms and the wind howled back. I shouted, but my voice was swallowed by the storm. It felt like a battle between the living and the restless dead. When dawn finally broke, the storm had passed, leaving destruction in its wake. The beach house was battered but still standing, its secrets buried deeper beneath the calm summer sun. The townsfolk emerged cautiously, assessing the damage and sharing stories of strange lights and cries heard during the storm. I found the cliffs eerily silent, the carved symbols washed away by rain and tide, as if the storm had tried to erase the past. But the house seemed different, quieter, as if holding its breath. I knew Eleanor's spirit had been confronted but not defeated. The heat of summer had awakened something old and powerful, and its cycle was far from over. My nights became restless again, filled with shadowed visions and distant cries carried by the wind. The beach house was no longer just a ruin. It was a warning. As summer rolled on, I felt different, like a chill was creeping in despite the heat. My dreams turned dark, filled with watery graves and haunted faces. I started hearing footsteps behind me on empty roads. But when I looked back, no one was there. Locals began sharing strange sightings near the beach house, flickering lights and shadowy figures. I felt drawn back, even though I didn't want to. One night I found an old lighthouse journal in the town museum, revealing disappearances linked to the beach and cliffs. It hinted at sacrifices and curses tied to something buried beneath the waves, awakening with the summer storms. As summer wrapped up, the vibe got tense. Nights turned chilly, but the sun still blazed on. On the last night before fall, I headed back to the beach house, ready to confront whatever awaited me. When midnight hit, the place glowed weirdly, like it had a heartbeat. That's when Eleanor's spirit showed up again, clearer and calmer. She didn't need words. Her sadness was a plea for peace. I realized the house and cliffs were stuck in a painful loop. At dawn, I set up a little ritual, leaving offerings at the cliffs and whispering for calm. The heat lifted, a soft breeze came in, and Eleanor finally found rest. The old beach house stood quiet, its secrets buried under the fading summer sun. The morning sun lit up the beach house ruins, but the silence felt heavy, like a mix of relief and sadness. After the ritual I did the night before, the summer breeze brought in the salty scent of the sea and wildflowers. The townsfolk started to come back, their faces showing hope and curiosity. For the first time in years, there were no screams or whispers from the house. Still, I felt cautious. The air buzzed with an energy that wouldn't quite fade. The summer heat warmed the ruins gently. Footprints appeared in the sand, but when I followed them, they vanished under the waves. Eleanor's spirit seemed at peace, but I knew the connection between us, the sea and restless spirits, was still there, a story waiting to be told someday. Days rolled by like any other, but the nights, they were something else. One warm summer evening, I was chilling outside, sipping cold water, when I heard soft footsteps behind me. I turned, but no one was there. Suddenly, the air got this weird chill, totally out of place for summer. From then on, strange stuff kept happening. Whispers mixing with the ocean's roar, shadows flitting through the trees, and lights flickering along the beach at dusk. It wasn't scary anymore, just little reminders that the line between worlds was thin. The locals got used to these oddities, seeing them as the ocean's way of keeping its secrets. The house felt peaceful, but its history was woven deep into the land and sea. The beach was this magical place where nature and something otherworldly mixed. The warm sand felt great underfoot, but there was this eerie vibe, like something was watching from the cliffs. On sunny days, kids ran wild along the shore, totally oblivious to the stories buried beneath. But at night, the ocean seemed to whisper warnings, reminding everyone that it could give life or take it away. One evening, as the sun set, I saw a woman with long, wet hair standing on the rocks. When I called out, she disappeared, leaving just the sound of the waves. It hit me then. Eleanor was more than just a memory. She was part of this place. Every summer, as the heat cranked up and storms brewed, the community felt a familiar tension. Fishermen whispered about nets snagged on something lurking beneath the waves. Campers sensed a strange presence near the cliffs, as if they were being watched. The old beach house, crumbling and abandoned, had turned into a legendary landmark. Curious visitors often left with a newfound respect for the coastline's power. Personally, I felt a deep connection to the place where Eleanor's story unfolded. Nature was alive around us, especially in the summer heat, reminding us that some horrors aren't about ghosts, but the weight of forgotten sorrow. On the last day of summer, the air felt heavy, like the world was holding its breath. I stood on the cliffs, watching the waves crash below, dark clouds rolling in. The house behind me creaked softly, sharing its old secrets. Eleanor's spirit was no longer angry but calm, though the land still felt its sadness. As the storm drew near, I realized this was a moment of change, not an ending. The sea took its toll every year, and the beach house quietly witnessed the cycle of life and death. That night, as the storm raged and lightning flashed, the line between worlds blurred again, but I was ready to face it. The blistering heat of late summer hung heavy over the small town, settling thick like a blanket over the school grounds. Students shuffled through the halls with tired eyes, voices low with the shared anticipation of the upcoming summer festival, the highlight of the year. Yet for Ethan, the festive atmosphere felt wrong, as if the warmth was a thin veneer masking something colder beneath. The old school building creaked and groaned under the sun's relentless glare, its brick walls stained with time and secrets. Rumors whispered among students spoke of strange happenings, flickering lights in empty classrooms, sudden gusts of cold air, and shadows moving just beyond sight. Ethan had noticed it himself, the way the summer heat sometimes seemed to disappear in certain parts of the school, replaced by a bone-deep chill. It was worse near the abandoned science wing, a section sealed off for years after a fire decades ago. As he passed by, the air thickened, his skin prickling despite sweat slicking his back. That afternoon, curiosity pulled him back there after classes, alongside his friend Sarah. Together, they slipped past the rusted gates into the silent hallways, flashlights cutting through the dark. The smell was heavy with mildew and burnt plastic, but beneath it lay something sharper, a metallic tang that set their nerves on edge. In the center of the charred room, they found remnants of old equipment, shattered glass and scorched papers. Yet among the debris lay a weathered wooden box etched with strange symbols, as if part of some forgotten ritual. Ethan's fingers trembled as he traced the carvings, their patterns twisting like tangled vines. Sarah flipped open the box's lid, revealing a collection of brittle parchments covered in cryptic writing and crude drawings. The drawings depicted a figure bound within a circle, flames licking the edges. The air seemed to hum with an unseen energy as they held the papers, and the temperature plunged abruptly, their breaths fogging in the summer air. Suddenly, the distant sound of laughter from the festival grounds contrasted sharply with the oppressive silence of the wing. Ethan folded the parchments carefully, deciding they needed answers, and fast. Back outside, the festivities marched on with oblivious cheer. Brightly colored tents, the smell of popcorn and caramel apples mingling with the heavy summer air. Yet as night approached, the festival lights flickered sporadically, casting jittery shadows that seemed to twitch and reach. The heat waned, replaced by a creeping cold that slithered through the crowd unnoticed. Ethan and Sarah shared a glance, knowing the strange force tied to the festival's origins was awakening again. By twilight, the old auditorium, the festival's main stage, loomed dark and silent, windows clouded with grime. Ethan felt an inexplicable pull toward the building, a magnetic tug that demanded they return. As they approached, the air around them thickened, and the ground beneath their feet felt unnaturally hard and dry, cracking with every step. A sudden gust of wind carried a faint whisper, half chant, half warning, that sent shivers racing down their spines. They exchanged a look of grim understanding. The festival wasn't just a celebration of summer. It was a ritual tied to a price long forgotten, but still due. Inside, the auditorium stage was littered with fresh claw marks and scorched spots, the scent of smoke, heavy and real. The temperature plummeted again, frost clinging to the edges of the stage as if winter had breached the summer's fortress. Shadows twisted and lengthened into grotesque shapes, and Ethan's flashlight flickered wildly. The parchment seemed to pulse faintly in his backpack, as if alive. From somewhere deep within the dark, a low, guttural growl echoed, vibrating through the floorboards like a warning. The summer festival was no longer just a backdrop. It had become the stage for something primal, dangerous, and hungry. The auditorium loomed before Ethan and Sarah like a hollowed beast, its cracked windows reflecting the dying light of summer dusk. As they crossed the threshold, a wave of cold washed over them, the sudden chill a sharp contrast to the lingering heat outside. The musty air was thick with dust and decay, carrying a faint metallic tang that set their teeth on edge. Their flashlights cut through the shadows, illuminating peeling paint and rotting wood that groaned underfoot. The distant laughter of the festival faded into nothingness, replaced by an oppressive silence that felt alive, watching, waiting. Deeper inside, strange symbols marred the walls, their jagged lines etched deep into the plaster like scars. Ethan traced a trembling finger over one of the carvings, the surface rough and unnervingly warm despite the cold air. These sigils matched those on the wooden box they'd found earlier, ancient markings meant to bind or summon. The floor beneath them was scarred with fresh claw marks, gouges that sliced through decades of dust and debris. The pattern was deliberate, a ritualistic signature left by something that didn't want to be disturbed. A sudden noise shattered the silence, a slow, wet dragging sound coming from beneath the stage. Ethan's heart pounded as he and Sarah edged toward the source. The trapdoor was heavy, resisting their efforts before finally giving way with a creak that echoed like a death knell. A rush of frigid air spilled out, carrying the stench of decay and old blood. Peering down into the darkness, their flashlight beams revealed a cramped crawl space littered with bones and shattered glass. Dark stains mottled the floor, slick and glistening in the weak light. As they peered down into the darkness, a rush of frigid air spilled out, carrying with it the unmistakable stench of decay and old blood that made their stomachs churn. Flashlights in hand, they aimed their beams into the cramped crawl space, revealing a gruesome sight. Bones scattered haphazardly and shards of glass glinting like forgotten memories. Dark stains mottled the floor, slick and glistening in the weak light, telling a story of horror that sent chills down their spines. What had happened here? They exchanged a glance, a mix of fear and curiosity sparking between them. This was no ordinary discovery. It felt like they were about to unearth something that should have remained buried. Without warning, a shadow flickered past the opening, too fast to be human, with teeth that gleamed unnaturally sharp. A low growl rumbled from the darkness below, vibrating through the floorboards and sending a shudder through Ethan's spine. This wasn't an animal. It was something else. Something that had waited too long in the darkness, hungry and restless. Sarah grabbed his arm, her voice tight with fear as she urged him to leave before it was too late. But as they climbed back into the auditorium, the sense of dread only deepened. The air thickened, heavy and suffocating, pressing down like a physical force. Around the bonfire pit outside, symbols were etched deep into the soil, fresh and raw, matching those inside. The earth bore claw marks that looked disturbingly like they'd been made by something alive and desperate. Ethan's gaze was drawn upward to the sky, where the festival lights flickered erratically, casting twisted shadows that danced like phantoms. The warm summer night had turned into something unrecognizable, tainted by the unseen presence that now stalked the school grounds. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed from the edge of the nearby woods. Branches snapped violently as if something large was moving swiftly just beyond the tree line. Ethan and Sarah spun toward the noise, flashlights sweeping the darkness, but found nothing. The cold returned in waves, their breaths visible as frost despite the season. The invisible weight of those unseen eyes pressed in, paralyzing yet urging them to flee. Their footsteps quickened, pounding against cracked pavement, as the distant festival sound seemed both comforting and cruelly distant. The low growl returned, louder and closer, reverberating through the hollowed halls and thick summer air. It was a sound born of ancient hunger, a beast long forgotten clawing its way back into the world of the living. Ethan's flashlight flickered violently, shadows twisting and lengthening around them as if the darkness itself was reaching out. The festival lights overhead flickered in response, as if warning the gathered crowds below that something was wrong, something deadly. Every instinct screamed for them to run, but the pull of the mystery held them fast. Their retreat was interrupted by a sudden, icy gust that blew through the auditorium, extinguishing their flashlights and plunging them into complete darkness. Panic clawed at their throats as the growling grew into a guttural roar, the sound surrounding them from all sides. The wooden floor beneath their feet trembled, splinters cracking as if the building itself was alive and angry. Hands, cold and rough, seemed to brush past them in the blackness, whispering threats they couldn't hear, but felt deep in their bones. With a desperate scramble, Ethan fumbled to relight his flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness just long enough to catch a glimpse of a twisted figure lurking at the edge of the room. Hulking, malformed, eyes glowing faintly with malevolence. The creature's snarled breath was hot against their skin, and the heavy silence shattered with its guttural roar. They ran, breaking through the exit and back into the night, their hearts hammering against their ribs as the cold presence faded but didn't disappear. Outside, the festival continued unaware, music and laughter echoing like a cruel mockery under the star-studded sky. But Ethan and Sarah knew the truth. The summer festival was no innocent celebration. It was a curse, a gateway, a price paid year after year to keep something ancient and hungry from spilling fully into the world. And this year, it had almost caught them. The sun had barely risen when Ethan and Sarah stumbled away from the school, breath ragged, bodies shaking but alive. The summer air was already warm, but the chill from the night clung stubbornly to their skin, like a shadow they couldn't shake. They kept glancing back, half expecting the twisted creature from the auditorium to burst from the shadows and drag them back into the darkness. But the school stood silent, its windows like empty eyes watching them flee. For a moment, relief flooded through them, until a sudden crash echoed from the building's upper floors. Heart pounding, Ethan turned and Sarah followed, their gazes locked on the school's silhouette. The roofline seemed to ripple, as if something massive shifted just beneath the shingles. The scent of smoke rose faintly, mixing with the iron tang that had haunted them since entering the auditorium. As the festival's distant drums and laughter beat on, it felt grotesquely normal, like nothing had happened. But Ethan knew better. They had disturbed something, and whatever it wasn't done with them. Days passed in a blur of restless nights and paranoid glances. The symbols they'd seen etched around the bonfire and inside the school haunted their dreams, burning into their minds with a vividness that made sleep an impossible refuge. News stories trickled in about strange disappearances in the town, kids vanishing near the festival grounds, leaving behind scorched patches of earth and deep claw marks in the dirt. Authorities were baffled, chalking it up to wild animals or pranksters. Ethan and Sarah knew the truth was far darker. Drawn by a sense of desperate necessity, they returned to the festival grounds under the cover of darkness. The bonfire pit was cold now, the ashes scattered by the summer breeze, but the ground beneath still bore fresh, deep gouges. Ethan knelt, running his fingers through the soil, feeling the residual heat beneath. The carvings were sharper now, glowing faintly with an otherworldly light that pulsed like a heartbeat. Sarah's voice trembled as she whispered, "It's still here." Suddenly the air shifted, a whisper of movement from the nearby tree line. Ethan's flashlight caught something just beyond the edge. A figure, half shadow, half smoke, watching them with eyes that burned cold and deep. The growl returned, low and threatening, vibrating in their chests as the creature stepped into the dim light. Its malformed body was a grotesque parody of a human, covered in jagged scars and dripping with something dark and viscous. It lunged without warning, the world narrowing to a blur of teeth and claws. They ran, stumbling through the thick summer grass, the creature's roars echoing behind them, a terrible soundtrack to their flight. The festival lights blurred ahead, a beacon of life and sanity in a night overrun by something primordial and furious. They burst into the crowd, panting and wild-eyed, but no one noticed the horror that followed them. The festival carried on, blissfully ignorant, while Ethan and Sarah knew the monster was still out there, waiting for its next chance. Days melted into restless weeks as the festival's grip tightened on the town. More disappearances, more strange symbols carved into trees and earth. And always, the cold presence watching from the shadows. Ethan and Sarah tried to warn people, to explain the danger lurking beneath the surface of the summer celebration. But their words fell on deaf ears, dismissed as hysteria or youthful fantasy. The creature had become a secret kept in silence, a dark truth buried beneath layers of summer joy. Late one night, Sarah vanished. Her screams cut through the quiet, sharp and desperate, but by the time Ethan found her, all that remained was a scorched patch of earth and those hateful claw marks. The festival was ending, but the curse was far from broken. Ethan swore then, beneath the pale light of the fading moon, that he would uncover the origins of the beast and end the cycle once and for all. Or die trying. The final night of the festival arrived, heavy with heat and a sense of impending doom. The bonfire was rekindled, flames licking hungrily at the night sky as the crowd gathered, unaware of the ancient hunger fed by their celebration. Ethan stood apart, clutching the box with the strange symbols, now glowing faintly with power. He knew what he had to do: face the creature, confront the darkness that had haunted his town for generations. As the fire roared, Ethan stepped into the circle of light, chanting words he barely understood but hoped would hold the monster at bay. The shadows around the bonfire twisted and writhed, coalescing into the monstrous form that had chased them through the night. The ground shook, the air thickened, and the summer festival became a battleground between light and darkness. The fight for the town's soul had begun, and Ethan was ready to pay whatever price it demanded. The mountain air was crisp, but heavy with anticipation as Lucas arrived in the village just hours before the summer solstice. Nestled between jagged peaks and thick forests, the place looked like it hadn't changed in centuries. Stone cottages with moss-covered roofs, narrow winding paths, and an eerie quiet that didn't feel accidental. Lucas was a city man, used to noise and chaos, but here, even the rustling leaves seemed muted, as if the forest itself held its breath. The villagers watched him with eyes that flickered between curiosity and warning, their faces tight-lipped as if words were a secret they refused to share. The moment he stepped into the village square, a small group of elders approached, their eyes solemn and voices barely above whispers. "You must understand, stranger," one said. "Tonight, we observe the silence. It's how we survive." Lucas smiled nervously, assuming it was some old folktale, a quaint tradition to honor the solstice. But as he looked around, he noticed every person, from the oldest to the youngest, fell completely silent after sundown, their expressions tense, almost fearful. When he asked why, They only shook their heads and avoided his gaze. Curious and skeptical, Lucas spent the afternoon wandering the village trying to catch a hint of what the silence meant. The shops closed early. The usual chatter of children playing stopped abruptly, and even the birds seemed to hold their songs. A young woman, Mira, finally confided in him just before dusk. "The silence keeps it away," she said, eyes darting nervously. "If anyone breaks it, the creature wakes, and no one is safe." Lucas chuckled uneasily, unwilling to accept such a terrifying superstition. But the dread in her voice planted a seed of unease deep inside. As the sun dipped behind the mountain ridges, the village transformed. Doors bolted, windows shuttered, and the streets emptied until only a few remained, huddled inside, faces pale and eyes wide. Lucas felt the weight of the silence pressing on him like a physical force. Every breath, every movement echoed in his ears. The distant howl of wind through the trees seemed sharper, more ominous than usual. He realized the villagers weren't just quiet. They were terrified. Night fell swiftly, and the darkness swallowed the village whole. Lucas sat in the small inn, the fire crackling faintly as he tried to shake off the growing tension. A knock at the door startled him. He opened it to find Mira, her face pale and eyes haunted. "Please," she whispered urgently, "you must not make a sound after midnight. If the silence breaks, it comes." Lucas frowned, frustrated by what felt like superstition, but a primal fear rooted him to the spot. There was no escaping the night and no room for mistakes. Minutes stretched like hours as Lucas struggled to keep quiet, but the silence was unnatural, suffocating. His own heartbeat thundered in his ears, threatening to betray him. The inn's wooden walls creaked and groaned under the weight of night, every noise magnified. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying strange guttural sounds that weren't quite animal, but far from human. Something moved just beyond the edge of the firelight, dark, shifting shapes that seemed to listen for even the faintest whisper. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the village. The silence shattered like glass. Lucas froze, every muscle tense, as terrified cries rose up, then were cut short. A terrible scream, guttural and inhuman, rippled through the night air. From the darkness came a low growl, deep and menacing, shaking the very earth beneath their feet. The creature had awoken. Panic erupted as windows slammed, doors banged, and villagers scrambled to silence their voices. But the monster was relentless. Mira grabbed Lucas's arm, pulling him toward the inn's back exit. "We have to stay silent. It hunts by sound," she hissed. They crept through shadowed alleys, breath shallow and footsteps careful, every scrape against stone sending a jolt of terror through their bodies. The creature's growls followed, hunting, relentless and unforgiving. They reached the edge of the village, where the forest thickened and the mountain rose steeply. Safety felt distant, impossible even. As they slipped into the trees, the night seemed alive with soundless menace. The creature moved with terrible speed and precision, guided by every vibration, every rustle. Lucas knew the summer solstice silence wasn't just a ritual. It was a line between life and death, and now that it was broken, the village's fate rested on their ability to outlast the hunt. The mountain air was still heavy, but something older and darker had been unleashed, and it was coming for them. The forest was dense and unforgiving, shadows tangled like grasping fingers among the twisted trunks. Lucas and Mira moved cautiously, their footsteps barely stirring the dry leaves, every breath a calculated risk. The darkness pressed down, and the silence felt unnatural. Not just the absence of noise, but a heavy, suffocating presence that seemed to watch and wait. Somewhere beneath the earth, the creature prowled, its senses tuned to the smallest vibration. One misstep could mean the end. Mira stopped abruptly, holding up a finger. Ahead, faint flickers of light glowed through the trees, other villagers trying to escape the monster's wrath. But every movement sent panic rippling through the group, and some whispered, desperate to break the silence with words of encouragement or fear. It was a dangerous gamble. The creature answered sound with a terrifying guttural roar, scattering the group like leaves before a storm. Lucas's heart pounded. The predator's hunt was methodical and brutal. They veered off the main path, deeper into the woods, hoping to lose the creature in the thicket. The ground was uneven, roots and rocks threatening to betray their careful steps. Mira's voice was a harsh whisper now, explaining the legend, the ancient pact made by the village ancestors, binding the creature beneath the mountain through the ritual of silence. Breaking the silence wasn't just taboo. It weakened the barrier, giving the creature a foothold in their world. It was a price paid in fear and sacrifice year after year. A sudden snap echoed sharply through the stillness. Lucas's ankle had caught on a hidden root, sending him sprawling against a moss-covered rock. The sharp pain was nothing compared to the spike of terror when he realized the creature's roar had returned, louder and closer this time. Mira's eyes widened in panic and she dragged him up, whispering fiercely for him to be still. But every breath, every heartbeat felt like a drum signaling their location. The forest seemed to pulse with menace. They pressed forward, adrenaline dulling the ache in Lucas's leg, but their progress slowed. The woods thinned as they reached a rocky outcrop overlooking the village below, now eerily lit by scattered fires and the occasional flicker of a desperate torch. The creature's presence was unmistakable. The earth trembled subtly, a reminder of its terrible power. Mira scanned the horizon, searching for other survivors. There were few. Most had fallen victim to their own voices, or worse, the creature's jaws. Suddenly a guttural growl erupted from behind. Lucas barely had time to turn before a massive shape lunged out of the shadows, its eyes glowing like molten gold. The creature was like nothing he had ever seen. Hulking, covered in rough bark-like skin, limbs ending in cruel talons that scraped the rocks with deadly intent. It moved with terrifying speed, a predator perfectly adapted to hunt in silence. Lucas barely dodged, falling back against the rocks, heart hammering as the monster circled. Mira screamed silently, signaling Lucas to stay low, but the creature wasn't fooled. It sniffed the air, sensing their fear, their panic. It was drawn to noise, but also to the emotional vibration of terror. An unrelenting hunter that thrived on the hunt itself. They needed a plan, something to distract it, but every instinct screamed to run, to flee blindly. Instead, Mira grabbed a jagged stone and hurled it into the thick forest. The sharp clatter echoed like a gunshot. The creature turned instantly, crashing after the distraction with bone-shaking force. Lucas and Mira seized the moment to scramble down the rocky ledge, limbs burning with exhaustion and fear. They stumbled through the underbrush, away from the village and deeper into the wild. The night stretched endlessly, the solstice's longest hours mocking their desperate flight. Every step forward was a gamble, every rustle a threat. As dawn's first pale light began to seep through the canopy, Lucas dared a breath of relief. But the silence remained, ominous and complete. Mira warned him it was the quiet before the final hunt, the creature retreating only to strike with renewed fury when night returned. The villagers' ritual wasn't just survival, it was a battle fought with every second of silence. Lucas realized that escaping the creature meant becoming part of a brutal ancient cycle, one he wasn't sure he wanted to join. Dawn broke over the mountain, but the relief was fleeting. The village lay quiet below, smoke still rising from smoldering fires, a haunting reminder of the night's chaos. Lucas and Mira crouched on the rocky ridge, muscles trembling from exhaustion and fear. The creature had vanished into the shadows, but they both knew it wasn't gone. It was waiting, lurking, biding its time for the solstice night to return. The silence wasn't just a ritual. It was a cage holding something monstrous, something that thrived on sound and death. Mira's voice was barely a whisper, though it felt loud in the eerie stillness. "We have to warn the others," she said, eyes scanning the horizon for signs of life. "The elders. They know how to fight it, but only if the ritual is kept perfectly. After tonight, everything has changed." Lucas nodded, pain and doubt gnawing at him. The villagers had spent centuries balancing on the edge of disaster, and he had shattered that fragile peace with his ignorance. Now, the creature hunted not just for survival, but for revenge. They climbed down toward the village, careful to avoid the scorched remains and broken stone. The few survivors moved like ghosts, faces pale and haunted, clutching weapons fashioned from old iron and sharpened wood. No one spoke. Words could mean death. Mira led Lucas to the central shrine, a crumbling stone altar marked with ancient symbols. Here the elders gathered, their faces lined with worry and determination. The air smelled of earth, ash, and something older, an ancient dread. The head elder, a gaunt woman with eyes like chipped flint, spoke in a voice both soft and commanding. The creature was bound beneath the mountain by our ancestors, but the bond weakens each year. The silence is our shield. Tonight, that shield cracked. She gestured to the broken remnants of the ritual circle around the shrine. We must repair it before the next solstice, or the creature will consume everything. Lucas felt the weight of his mistake crash down. He had become the catalyst for a terror that stretched beyond his understanding. Night crept back over the village, shadows lengthening and swallowing the light. The villagers prepared once more, gathering silently around the shrine, ready to renew the ritual. Lucas was handed a candle, its flickering flame a fragile beacon in the growing dark. The creature's growls echoed faintly from beneath the earth, a reminder that the hunt was far from over. Each villager held their breath, each heartbeat a prayer that the silence would hold, that the monster would remain trapped in its subterranean prison. As the solstice reached its peak, a deep rumble shook the ground beneath them. The creature stirred, furious and desperate. The ritual began, chants in an ancient tongue, movements precise and unyielding. Lucas followed, mimicking the elders, feeling the primal energy course through the village. The silence was more than soundless. It was a binding force, a war fought with wills and centuries of fear. The creature clawed at its bonds, a living nightmare desperate to break free. Suddenly, a sharp scream shattered the circle. A young boy, terrified and trembling, had whispered aloud. The creature's roar shattered the night like thunder, its fury unleashed. Villagers scattered, some trampled in the chaos. Lucas's heart hammered in terror as the monster lunged from the shadows, talons tearing through stone and flesh alike. Mira grabbed him, dragging him to safety behind the altar's broken stone. The hunt had begun anew. The battle was brutal and silent. No words, only primal screams swallowed by the darkness. The villagers fought with desperate courage, every weapon aimed at keeping the creature restrained. But the monster was relentless, fueled by the broken silence and the scent of fear. Lucas realized survival depended not just on strength, but on discipline, on maintaining the fragile peace that kept this horror at bay. One mistake could mean extinction. As dawn finally broke over the mountain ridge, the creature retreated, wounded but unbroken. The villagers, battered and grieving, gathered to rebuild the circle, their resolve hardened by loss. Lucas stood among them, forever changed, a stranger no longer, but a guardian of silence. The summer solstice was over, but the horror remained, waiting patiently beneath the earth, bound by fear and ancient rites. The silence would return, and so would the hunt. Lucas knew this was only the beginning. The mountain held its secrets close, and the creature beneath was a dark force of nature, wild, merciless, and eternal. The summer solstice silence was not just a tradition, it was survival, and breaking it was a sentence no one could escape.